Let's discover together the nonlinear animation in Duik. But what is this? So it's a feature to allow you to edit multiple animations together like you would edit together video clips. But here there are animations and you can have transitions between them. For example, here I have a composition which I use as an example. And first, as you can see, I have an enabled layer, which is the result, the rendering composition. And 4 other pre-compositions, which are what I called clips, which are the animations I'm editing together, from the walk to the run cycle, with a transition again to the walk cycle, then the character stops and looks up, because this is the look up composition. What's nice with this is, for example, you can make the character look up at another time. I just have to pick this composition where he looks up here. I can just select this composition and change the time at which I want it to be animated so that the character looks up at this right time. What's really interesting is that I can make him look up during another animation. For example, here during the run cycle, my character can look up while continuing to run, just like this, because this is the time where I want him to look up. He walks, transition to the run cycle, and looks up, and walk again, then stop, but he keeps looking up. What's interesting is that I can really choose specifically at which time I want him to look up. But for example, I can also, after he stops, for example, make him get back to the rest pose, the original pose, using the opacity keyframes on this pre-composition. And this way I deactivate the composition and the character gets back to the previous pose. So he can look up when I want, even if there is another animation at the same time, and at another time I can just stop this pose, this animation, using just the opacity of the layers, which I can use to transition between animations. For example, here, I could use the opacity keyframes to stop the walk cycle later. Let's just make this comp a bit longer and bring the opacity keyframes at another time. And this way, my character continues to walk and stops at another time in the composition, and then gets back to the rest pose. So it's really easy to edit multiple animations together. I really think this new tool can be very, very useful to edit a lot of animations like you would with any video clip, just using opacity keyframes to transition between the animation. Of course, these opacity keyframes, here it's a bit rough, so I can use the easing to improve the transition here from one pose to the other. And I can even go into a lot more details with the graph editor. And Duik will keep this into account when animating the transition between the two poses. So I really have a very precise control on these transitions just using simple opacity keyframes. And this being said, it's really easy to add other animations or to modify existing animations. For example, here, maybe I want my character to be a bit tired, so I just made this very simple clip with just a pose where the character is leaning forward like this. And in my edit composition, I can just pick this clip and add it to the composition. And it's going to mix to be added to the other animation. I'm just keeping the same animation, but it's now blended with the other pose, the new pose. So it's the same animation with a different pose, like an animation layer. As you can see, I have all the same animations as before, but combined with the pose, the tired pose I've just added. And he can even look up with the same pose. Everything is mixed together. And of course, I could also add a few keyframes on this pose to choose exactly at which time it starts to be tired. For example, here, let's deactivate the composition at first. Let the character walk, run, look up, and then he slows down again, stops, and here I could activate this tired pose. At the same time, he stops looking up. I can just add a few keyframes here, just a couple of keyframes, from 0 to 100% to activate this new pose. And the same way I did with the other transition, I can use the easing and the graph editor to improve and go into more details on the transition. And now he transitions from looking up to the tired pose instead of the rest pose. So this is a really easy way to combine different animations. My advice is just to cut the layers if there are 0% opacity. Let's just cut them the same way here. Maybe here if it's 0%, I could just cut this layer so it's easier to manipulate later. I already see when I have the animations, and I can work as I would with video clips instead of animations. This is the result with all these animations combined together and with easy transitions, made just with opacity keyframes. For example, here, the transition between the walk and the run cycle is just a few opacity keyframes, exactly like a crossfade in video editing. What's interesting with this nonlinear animation tool is that you can animate a lot of different stuff very easily, because you just have to animate single clips. For example, here I just have a very simple walk cycle, another comp with just a run cycle, and I don't have to animate the transitions between them. I just animate each cycle independently. I have this other clip with the character looking up, and finally this tired pose I showed you before. You don't even need keyframes, it can be just a pose. And with just these 4 clips, I have the whole animation with all transitions and everything. So this is much faster than having to animate all of this manually. And I can just, at any time, adjust the edit to change the timing of any animation. I'm now going to show you exactly how to use this nonlinear animation tool. So, as an example, we're going to animate a simple ball, a sphere, which I'm going to create with Duik because it's faster. In the Tools, the Layer tab, you have some tools to create some shapes like this, like a circle in the center of a comp, which is a simple shape layer. Let's prepare this for the animation. So I think this is a bit too big, so I'm going to lower the size of this circle. So it's a ball, and I'm going to move it to put it on the ground and move the anchor point at the bottom of the layer, because this will be easier to animate the scale and make it a bit more alive. So I'm preparing everything I need to animate, and now I can animate this. So I'm going to create the nonlinear animation using Duik. Before that, maybe I can just rename the composition. It's always a good idea to name your composition. And now I'm selecting the layer I want to animate, make sure it's selected, and click on the nonlinear animation button in the animation tab. And Duik prepares everything for me. You'll have a folder with 4 compositions. The render composition. This is where Duik does all the computing. It's the one you can use for the final render. If you have a look at the expressions, you'll see that Duik added a few expressions for the nonlinear animation. Don't change anything there. Let Duik do its thing. The original comp is just a copy of the composition as it was when I created the nonlinear animation tool. Just keep it because Duik needs it to create new clips later. But don't touch anything in there. In the edit composition, this is where you're going to edit the animation together. Like I showed you in the introduction. You have the render composition to see the results, and your first clip is already here and disabled. And finally, the clip composition is where you're going to animate your layer. So let's just animate something in there. Let's create a new animation. First, rename the composition again, and let's make this ball jump. Okay. And let's create this animation with just a few keyframes on position and scale. Here it is, the jumping ball. So as the animation is much shorter than the composition, I'm just going to trim the composition so it's easier to edit just after. Trim comp. This will make it easier to manipulate in the edit composition because I can really see when the ball is jumping and how long it lasts. So I can already choose when I want it to jump, and I could even just duplicate this layer to make it jump once and twice. You could even duplicate once more and have as many copies as you wish of the animation. And you'll see that this is very light and very fast to compute, because After Effects just have to read the values of the animation. It's really fast. Now, the interesting thing is not only to edit this single clip, but adding more clips to do other stuff with the ball. For example, I want it to grow a little bit. So I'm just going to create a new clip to animate the ball growing. To create a new clip, I'm going into Duik, and next to the nonlinear animation button, you have the options with the Add New Clip button, which will add a new clip to the current nonlinear animation composition, in case you have multiple nonlinear animations in the project. The clip is created, opened. This is a new clip, which I can rename already. Let's call this Grow, because it's going to grow, and do this animation, like I did with the jump. Let's use a few keyframes on the scale property with a nice anticipation. Here is the new animation, and as I did before, let's just trim this composition so it's shorter and keep only what's needed. And in the edit, the clip is already there because Duik added it for me, and I can make the ball grow at any time. For example, here, in between the two jumps, I can just make it grow. Here it is. Be careful, there is a small bug in this version of After Effects. As the clip ends here, the out point is here, we should get back to the original size of the ball after it. But After Effects keeps the value of the composition even if we're outside of it. Maybe you can come on the Adobe forum to vote for the bug report I have posted already to make sure it's fixed as quickly as possible. And in the meantime, when you add a new clip in the nonlinear animation composition, and you still see the pose after the end of the clip, just take the end, cut the layer, and bring it back to the end. And this fixes the bug. So this is what we should have. It grows, and after the composition, it should get back to the original value. So here, on this specific case, I wanted to keep its size after the end. And for this, I can use the time remap property. And this way I can make it longer. And thanks to the time remap, I can keep the end pose of this animation. So the ball jumps, grows, and I keep the end value. Maybe I could even make it longer so that during the second jump, it is still bigger. The two animations are very simply combined together. And then at one time, maybe the ball could get back to its original size. So there are two ways to do that. First, an easy way is to use the opacity on the composition to get from 100% to 0%. So the ball gets back to the original size smoothly like this. And maybe I could even use the graph editor to improve this transition. So it's smoother like this. The advantage of this method is that it's really easy to modify, to change the duration of the transition and do anything you want with it. But if you want to go into more details in the animation with a better animation, we could just get back inside the clip to add the shrinking animation. So I have to make the composition longer. Let's say I need 40 frames. It can be changed at any time, it's not a problem. And make the layers longer too. So the ball is big, and at one time, maybe, for example, the 24th frame, after the ball grew, I can do the animation of the shrinking ball. So I have both animations, one after each other, in the same composition, and I can use in the edit the time remap property to choose at which time it's going to shrink. Let's remove the opacity keyframes and get back to the time remap. So here it goes from 0 to 18, which is the part where the ball grew. And from frame 24 is going to shrink. So here, when I want it to shrink, add a new keyframe at 24, and the end is 40, so another keyframe which with 40 as its value. And just make sure the duration of this is right, because if it's too slow or too fast, you'll change the velocity of the animation. Duik uses the time remap value to animate the clip, so it's really easy to change the duration of an animation and make it slower with just moving the time remap keyframes of the clip. So I can combine together as many animations as I want. They can be animated together, blended, mixed together. It works with something simple like this, or with a complete character, or you could use that on a face to animate a lip sync, for example, with each pose of the mouth as an animated clip. And you can combine expressions, anything you'd like. One last thing I want to show you. Let's say I want to change the color of this ball. I can create a new clip to come and change the color of this ball. Let's say it's going to be red. Let's rename this new clip red. And in the edit, I have the red clip here, but the sphere is still purple. Why didn't it change? Because when we created the nonlinear animation compositions, Duik rigged only the transform properties. I mean the position, rotation, scale, opacity, and the anchor point. Only these properties are rigged to be used with the nonlinear animation, and the color is somewhere else. So I need to add the color to the nonlinear animation. There are two ways to do that, which are very simple. In the render composition, where Duik computes everything, have a look at the transform properties. You'd see the expression of the nonlinear animation tool, which you can copy and just paste in the properties you want to add in the animation. For example, here, the color. Let's remove this to show you the other way, which is even simpler. Just select the property you want to add and click on nonlinear animation in Duik. And it automatically adds the needed expression for you. So in the edit now, when you have the red precomposition, the sphere, the ball is red, and if you remove it, it gets back to purple. So you can choose at the exact time where the color will change by just moving this clip. For example, if I wanted to get red here when it grows, and we could even be more precise than that. Let's use opacity keyframes to animate the transition. It works with the color, but with any property. And it's really not an opacity animation. It's really an interpolation of the animation. You can see in the colors in between that it's an animated color and not just something transparent. Here it is. And if I wanted to get back to purple, I can, the same way, I add just a couple of keyframes at the end to get back to 0% opacity. this is how you can use this nonlinear animation tool. Just to let you know, if you're working on a read character with Duik, let's open one character to show you. To create a nonlinear animation with this character, just don't select anything and click on the nonlinear animation button. Duik will automatically create and use all the controllers, their transform properties, and their effects to set up the nonlinear animation. So it's really quick to set up a character. If it has been rigged with Duik, everything is automatic. You could also just select a few of the controllers to rig only the selected controllers, and only these controllers will be used in the nonlinear animation. But as we've just seen, you could add other properties later if you wish.